Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. On today's program, we'll be joined by beat writer Orion Sang from the Detroit Free Press for one final preview before next week's opener. A reminder to like us on Facebook and Twitter and give us that 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts from, and we thank you in advance. We all know it's been a strange year in every way. When it comes to college football, it has been a roller coaster ride. Will we play? When will the season start? How will COVID impact the season? For the SEC, ACC, and Big 12, the results have been mixed. A handful of games have been postponed, and just about every team has a new batch of positives every week. But so far, the season has started better than many experts expected it would. Big news this week was Nick Saban testing positive. I'm sure he won't be the last coach to be impacted by this virus. My guest today says he can't wait to tee it up next week in Minnesota. He is not sure how good Michigan is, none of us are, and right now he's even predicting a 4-4 season. Beat writer Orion Sang from the Detroit Free Press joins me next on this week's edition of The Michigan Man, so stay with us. Here with us on our Game Day segment as we do what we think is our last preview before the season gets underway is Orion Sang from the Detroit Free Press. It's been a while, Orion. Great to have you back with us.
Great to be back, Mike.
It's just a bit more than a week from the Big Ten starting play, a week from this coming Saturday, and we have a start time for Michigan at Minnesota, and we start off with a bang on national Saturday night TV game, and with an 8-game schedule, this one is huge, isn't it, Orion?
It is. It's a new era of Michigan football, too, you know. New quarterback, relatively new team across the board, and they get a night game. Although I'm not sure a night game in this year's schedule means as much as a night game in a normal year, you know, without fans at the games. So
you're right about that. Everything's going to be strange this year, but it is a 7:30 p.m. Kickoff, and there will be a lot of eyes on this first game of Michigan football. High expectations from the Gophers, too. But you mentioned one of the things we will all be watching is a new quarterback. Joe Milton will make his first start in that game, and while many fans seem to expect, big things right away, I do think we have to be cautious. We have no idea what we're going to get from him right now, do we?
I think I've mentioned this before when I've spoken with you, but I think quarterback is probably the most important position on the field nowadays, in college football especially. I think Milton will dictate the ceiling and the floor of this year's team. You know, if he is what everyone is saying, then I think, Michigan is going to be better than expected. But if he's a little more erratic, a little more inconsistent in plays like we've seen him play in the past, then 4-4 is very much on the table for his team. It's a really young offense that they're replacing a lot of guys, and that may not be conducive to starting a new quarterback. So we'll see. Obviously, he's got a really, really high potential. We all know he's got a big arm. It's about whether the rest of his game has improved as well. So we'll see. That's a big question mark for the season is just how good Joe Milton will be.
We really have not seen much of him. He's had a little mop-up duty. As far as from a fan's perspective, this is going to be his first start. Listen to Josh Gaddis and Jim Harbaugh talk about him. If he's even nearly as good as they think he can be, his ceiling is very high.
I think one area that you have to look at is the downfield passing, because I think Michigan struggled a bit in that area last season. Whereas in 2018, when they took some deep shots, they really excelled and capitalized on those. But last year, there were some, plays to be made downfield that just didn't quite hit for various reasons. And I think, Milton with his arm strength, if they can get more production from him in the deep game, then that might really help out a younger offense and really might help them be more explosive in that regard. I think another area to watch him in is the run game, the quarterback run game. We've actually seen more from him as a runner than as a passer, which is interesting because, he's not like a Justin Fields type of quarterback, I think. Joe Milton is not a 4.4 40 type of guy. He's definitely not like a run-first quarterback. But we have seen him run a lot at Michigan. I think they can really use him in short yardage situations just because of his size. They can call the read option, they can call quarterback power, quarterback counter. just because I think it's going to be hard for teams to stop him. He's huge. So if you get him going with some momentum, he can stretch off for a yard, a couple of yards. I think that might help them in short yardage situations, fourth down and stuff like that. So there's a lot of ways they can use him. It's just about if he can maximize his potential. And like I said, that's the big question. How much has he improved since last season?
He just has to get the yards when they're there, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think so. I think we saw last season that Josh Gaddis' offense, opened up plenty of windows. There were guys open downfield. There were yards to be taken. I think, if what Joe Milton is a very reliable quarterback who hits maybe one or two big plays downfield per game and is an asset in the run game, I think that's good for Michigan. He doesn't have to be, a star quarterback right away. He just has to do his job, because I think there will be opportunities in the offense for other guys to make plays.
Well, Josh Gaddis, now in his second year as offensive coordinator, and even though he did not have spring practice to continue that offensive build or install, should we expect this offense to be more efficient this year?
It depends. On the one hand, obviously these guys are more experienced with the system. They've been in it for over a year now. They understand the plays, the concepts. There's more familiarity. On the other hand, they have a lot to replace. I think the biggest thing is they've got to replace 4 really high-level offensive linemen. And you look at the NFL, Michael Onwenu, he's a star right now. Ben Bredesen was really good. John Runyon. Those guys are going to be hard to replace. Cesar Ruiz as well. And I think it could take some time for that unit to gel, especially in pass protection. And then you look at the receivers. They have to replace Donovan Peoples-Jones, Nico Collins, Trey Black. There's question marks, at some of these positions on offense. And I think it could take some time for them to get used to playing next to each other. And I think that could result in some early struggles. I do think there's a chance that there could be less mental mistakes. We saw last year that they fumbled a lot. They couldn't stop shooting themselves in the foot early on. I think some of those mental mistakes could go away. I just think that, the talent level maybe is not as high as it was last season. I don't know. We'll see.
It is going to take time. It always does early in the season for an offensive line, but Jalen Mayfield is back. That is a huge thing. To me, we keep reading, yes, this offensive line is inexperienced, but there are a lot of pieces that will be starting that did log time last year. So I think the big key to watch there is that development, because there's definitely talent.
I think we've all seen, what inconsistent offensive line can do to a team's offense.
Yeah.
It's certainly tanked a couple of Harbaugh's teams in the most important moments possible. Now they have Ed Warner. He's been a really good offensive line coach since he's gotten here. So certainly his track record has shown that he can cobble together a good offensive line. I just think that while the offensive line may be really good later down the stretch, during the final games of the season, I think that there are going to be some growing pains, just because they have to get used to playing next to each other. They have to get used to picking up blitzes, blocking together in the run game. And I think that there will be a bit of a learning curve.
Well, I'm excited to see who's going to get the carries in the backfield. And for the first time in a long time, we have a nice collection of speed and power to work with, don't we, Orion?
Yeah, this is probably the deepest backfield, I think, of Jim Harbaugh's Michigan tenure. I can't really think of another. There's Charbonnet, Haskins. Those guys are dependable. They can break tackles. They're maybe not going to break the 40 to 50-yard runs, because we didn't really see that last season. But, they can run inside. They can get you tough yardage. And then obviously, Chris Evans adds another element. He was a efficient pass catcher in previous offenses, even though they didn't throw to the back all that much. He made the most of his opportunities there. And then Blake Corum, was a really productive high school back with legitimate 4.4 speed. I think those two guys are intriguing because, we saw what Charbonnet and Haskins could do last season, and they were pretty good. Maybe they weren't, the J.K. Dobbins or Jonathan Taylors that could break off long runs, but they were good backs. And now you add a couple guys who do have some of that big playability. There's a lot of depth there, a lot of different skill sets.
Yeah, I know a lot of fans ask me, are we going to have that one guy that gets his 20 carries? But, when you look at the collection of speed and talent that we do have, and this offense that Josh Gaddis likes to run, it really lends itself to 2 or 3 backs playing, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. We saw last season, they would move some of those receivers into the backfield. Like Giles Jackson, I recall, was came out of the backfield a couple of times, ran a wheel route. But, they did some interesting stuff with him. I'm wondering maybe now that they have Chris Evans, Blake Corum, maybe we'll see those guys in those 2-back sets instead of, maybe like Giles Jackson or Mike Stainer still. Obviously, those 2 guys, Jackson and Sanger still have a huge role in the offense, or a bigger role that they did last year. They can do some interesting things with the backs for sure.
And the receiving corps has plenty of speed, which is exactly what Josh Gaddis wants in his speed and space offense. But do we have a core of receivers ready to step up and make big-time catches? I think that's the question for a lot of us. This is a big year for that group, isn't it, Orion?
It is. They don't have that downfield, big jump ball type of target now, and Nico Collins, and I think Collins probably would have been one of the top receivers in the Big Ten. But now they got to figure out how to move forward without him. They have Ronnie Bell, who was really productive last year out of the slot. Maybe he will play more on the outside. You could certainly see that. I think it's up to the younger receivers to make a step forward though in year two. You saw them those freshman receivers get a lot of playing time last year. They weren't the top receivers on the team, but they did play.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to expect one or two of those guys to take a step forward. There's some freshman receivers that have earned some praise as well. AJ Henning, Roman Wilson are those two guys. I think you'll probably see them play too. They just don't have that many numbers at that spot. So they're in an interesting position for sure, but I think they're really going to have to rely on Ronnie Bell.
And right now, a bit more than a week before the opener, I think it's safe to say there is ample talent on this offense. But to me, the big question is what it's been for the last, 5, 6, 7 years. When we play Alabama or we play Ohio State, we hang for a while, but we just don't seem to have a playmaker or a group of playmakers that can do what those two teams do. Really, if we're going to notch it up, we have to develop or see that happen, don't we?
Yeah. I think especially with this offense, they try to put guys in positions to succeed in one-on-one situations, whether it's a running back, meaning a safety or a cornerback down the field, or a slot receiver getting a bubble screen. It's up to these skill position players to make some of those bigger plays happen, to turn like a 10-yard game into a 20-yard game or more.
Yeah.
And they're fast, so they're quick. They've changed how they recruit those positions. So I think, they're on the way to make some of that stuff happen.
Well, when I look at the other side of the ball, there are times when I've seen Don Brown in the last month or two, and it's almost with that look on his face as if he's saying, I know something you guys don't. He has to exude confidence for his players. They're going to see what he's saying. But I get this weird feeling he thinks the defense might be better than the experts and we expect. Do you get that sense, Orion?
Yeah, I think the main thing would be his confidence in the defensive line. Obviously, Kwity Paye and Aiden Hutchinson are, I would say that's probably the best defensive end duo returning in the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
Up there for sure. They're really good, and they'll be great if they can add more pass rush this season. But obviously the big question is the interior of the line. Michigan was gashed by some of the better running teams last season on schedule. They didn't seem to have much depth at defensive tackle and nose guard. They were playing guys that hadn't really played before, and some of those guys were struggling. So the biggest thing, that we've heard this offseason is, we feel good about the defensive line. We feel good about the defensive tackles. That's what a lot of people have said. Jim Harbaugh, Don Brown, Sean Nua. And it's kind of like I'll believe it when I see it type of thing, because it's like we've seen what Carlo come to do, and he's solid, but he's not like I wouldn't say he's like Mo Hurst or Ryan Glasgow or some of those guys they've had in the past. Chris Hinton's former 5-star prospect didn't play that much last season. They've got guys like Donovan Jeter, Jeff State, who have never really put it together in their careers, and they feel good about where they're at, but we've seen this type of stuff before where they have off-season praise, off-season hype, and then, when the season rolls around, it doesn't really quite live up to expectations. So we'll see. That's what I'm watching, though. If they can get really good play and have more depth on the interior of the defensive line, then this defense will look better, I think.
Well, lack of depth is mentioned at that linebacker position, too, but we have a solid trio of starters, don't we?
Yeah, I think McGrone has really good speed and agility for the position. Obviously, last year he was kind of learning as he was going. They just had to throw him in the fire. I think he feels more confident, in what he's seeing on the field. And that could make him even faster. He could react even faster now. Josh Ross, I think, was really good in 2018. Obviously, last season he lost to injuries. The big question for me is Viper. I think they have a lot of praise for Michael Barrett, his physical abilities. He played a lot on special teams last season, which is usually an indicator that, they trust him. He had a big role there. I think they've been preparing him for this role for some time now. But they have mentioned some other players, like Anthony Solomon, William Mohan. So I'm curious to see if this job is, Barrett's 100% or if they're going to play some of those other guys. We'll see.
Well, a lot of talk about the secondary this week. On Jim's radio show Monday night, he talked about Dax Hill being a standout, mentioned Vincent Gray was looking good at one corner. Then he talked about a few guys battling at that other corner. Your overall take on what we have in this secondary, especially at the corners?
Yeah, I mean, it's great at one spot, and at the other spot, they're still figuring things out. There's a lot of names. I mean, Harbaugh mentioned DJ Turner, Andre Selden, George Johnson. I'm trying to think. Oh, yeah, Sammy Foston, who just moved there from safety.
Yeah.
Don Brown mentioned. Jalen Carey is doing really well. I don't think Harbaugh mentioned him. So, I mean, I think it's like every guy they have at corner is in there fighting for those jobs. Braun mentioned Green was a leader in the clubhouse last week, and it seems like they like him, but they don't like him enough to have made him a starter yet necessarily. So we'll see. I mean, you can sort of mitigate some of the uncertainty at cornerback with the Dax Hill or Brad Hawkins, because we've seen in previous years the Don Brown defense is a staple is they'll roll the safety down and to cover the slot on passing downs. We saw that last year with Dax Hill. He played a lot of nickel. So, if they don't feel confident in putting three cornerbacks out there, they don't really have to. They can put three safeties out there, or they can spin Dax down, spin Brad Hawkins down. They feel confident about Brad Hawkins' cover skills too. So we'll see. I do think cornerback is probably the biggest question mark right now, alongside defensive tackle. We've heard more praise for defensive tackles than the cornerbacks, that's for sure. So we'll see. That's definitely the one spot I'm watching, is that second cornerback spot. And, Gray played a lot last year, too. You have to wonder how he'll handle being, the number one guy, too, because he hasn't done that before. He doesn't have the track record of a Lavert Hill or Andrew Thomas, so we'll see.
Yeah, and one of the things Don Brown talked about last week was maybe moving Dax Hill around. He said he thinks he's already maybe the best cover guy in the Big Ten, but they could move him around. He likes to do that. Do you see the opportunity for him to maybe show up at corner sometimes?
He could. Like I said, the safeties, they are often asked to cover man-to-man in the slot. So I think you could see him as a nickel cornerback a ton. I mean, like he was last season. And maybe, they did hint at moving him around, possibly even on the outside, so maybe we'll see that. I think I would be more confident just seeing him cover, slot receivers covered in the nickel. He's done that before, and he's proven he can do that capably. I think he's going to be a huge part of their defense. If he can move down over the slot on passing downs and lock that up, Michigan gets a good pass rush. That will go a long way towards shutting down other passing offenses.
Well, special teams has to be a point of emphasis, as they are every year, because they are so pivotal, especially in the field position aspect of the game. Who do you think we'll see getting the first shot in the punt and kick return piece of the game?
I think Giles Jackson's probably the incumbent at kick return. He was really good last season, had a touchdown against Maryland, was productive otherwise. I think he had a good one against Michigan State, too. He's got some big play potential back there. I think we'll probably see him and all. I believe Jay Harbaugh said they were still figuring things out there. At punt returner, I don't know. That's also open. Ronnie Bell, I think, got a look when Donovan Peoples-Jones was hurt. So if you want a guy with dependable hands, who has some wiggle, Bell's probably your guy. I think if you're Michigan, you're leaning towards a safer option at punt return. A guy who will field it without any problems. And then if he can give you something after that, then that's a bonus. But we'll see. That's just my guess. They're still figuring things out there. So they've shown in the past that they're willing to use multiple guys. There have been times when I think Donovan Peoples-Jones' freshman season, they kind of tried a few guys there, so we'll see. I could see that happening this year too.
Well, as far as the kicking game goes, Hart's going to handle the punting. We're in great shape there, but I guess it's still a battle as to who will get the nod, field goals, extra points. It would be nice to see Quinn Nordin pick up where he left off last year, wouldn't it?
Yeah, he was really good to end the season. It was kind of in contrast to 2018 when Jake Moody was the one who was, really accurate towards the end of that year. I mean, it's kind of a luxury to have two kickers with that type of track record and that type of experience, honestly. I don't know how they handle that going forward. Maybe it just looks the way it has the past 2 years where, the hot hand gets the nod. Kicking is an underrated part of college football.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you don't have good kicking, that can really, really cost you. I mean, that can cost you games. We've already seen that across college football this year. So having two kickers, I think, will help them. I'm just not sure how it'll play out. It's gone both ways, the past two seasons, so we'll see.
You're right. It's a luxury to have two guys with legs like that, as the way we did it last year went with a hot hand. I'm not sure if that's the best way to do it. We could see both of them. Quinn Nordin seems to, at times, he can boom them from 50, 55. We've seen that, and then he, in the 20 to 25 range, he just flat out misses them, and it gets in his head. He says mentally he's better prepared this year than he's ever been, though.
he's always had a leg. I just think he's had some consistency issues.
Yeah.
I mean, Moody kind of had the same thing crop up last year after being really accurate in 2018. I don't know, though. I mean, like, you've got two guys. If one guy wins the job and starts to falter, I mean, I think it would make sense to give the other guy a shot, too. You know, there's no point in sticking with the guy who's missing his kicks when you've got another proven option on the bench. I don't know. That'll be one thing for Jay Harbaugh to figure out. I think they've done a solid job at dealing with that the past 2 seasons. I think their kicking game has been, above average. It's been good. Maybe this season they'll take the next step with those guys getting another year to work on their craft.
Well, I think it's safe to say the Big Ten fan base is pretty much jacked out of their minds for next Saturday and getting this season kicked off finally. I mean, at this point, I think people know it's only an 8-game schedule, so every game is big. And as a fan, you really can't ask for more than that, can you, Orion?
They probably feel left out after watching college football the past 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. I mean, Big Ten is finally back, and I think fans will be happy to see that happen. I do think it's going to be a very interesting season. I mean, just look at what other teams have done. I don't think there've been, I guess, aside from Clemson, there really haven't been any dominant teams this season. Every team has question marks. Every team has struggled at one point or another. It's just going to be a wild year, I think. I think for most teams, you could see some inconsistency, some defensive issues, some offensive issues, sloppiness. I mean, but that's just the nature of how this offseason played out.
It's been sort of nice for you, though, to watch other teams than Michigan in the Big Ten for the last month or so?
Yeah, I mean, I always watch a lot of college football. I like watching other conferences last season, too, obviously, aside from the Big Ten. I just think it's been interesting to note the quality of play. I don't think anyone would say that the quality of play this year has been comparable to past seasons. You've seen teams really struggle defensively. I mean, Alabama couldn't stop Ole Miss, almost went tempo, and I think Alabama really struggled with that speed. You saw guys might have been out of shape, might have struggled to get lined up in time. Georgia almost lost to Arkansas the first game. LSU obviously struggling. They did lose a lot of guys from last season. So some other teams like Texas and Oklahoma just look completely unprepared in some situations. So I don't know. I think the teams that will play the most consistently, the most safe, I guess, the less mistakes, the less self-inflicted wounds, I think those teams will be the most successful, the teams that have the highest IQ out there. Maybe these teams aren't necessarily the most talented, but, if they make the least amount of mistakes, then they'll be successful.
Well, it seems as if every year at this point, when the season is starting, we say, hey, it's a big one for Michigan football. Expectations are always high. But given this year's circumstances with COVID and the just disjointed start of college football, and there's a new quarterback under center, only an 8-game schedule, still fair to say to you in your mind that this is a pivotal season for the Jim Harbaugh era?
I guess so. The way I would explain it is I think fans should probably temper their expectations. I mean, this was the team that was, I think, number 121, if not lower, in returning production this offseason. And then they lost Ambry Thomas and Nico Collins, and their best cornerback, their best receiver. So there's a lot to replace, and history shows that when you don't have that many returning starters, you can really struggle. There's talent on the roster, don't get me wrong. I mean, a lot of it is just unproven. And in a COVID season, how is that going to affect their development? They didn't have spring ball. They just started padded practices fairly recently. And what if someone tests positive? We haven't even talked about that yet. That can knock them out for a large portion of the season. There are just all these variables surrounding this team, all these question marks. I mean, I picked them to go 4-4. I don't think you can really fault Jim Harbaugh, for going 4-4 or 5-3. It's a tough situation. A lot of question marks, like I said, personnel-wise. At the same time, though, I mean, it is year 6, so the fact that they are having these roster issues in year 6, I think, could speak to a larger issue. They haven't really taken that next step yet, and it would be a bad thing, in my opinion, to take a step backwards, to go back from being 9-4 and 10-3 to being worse than that at this juncture of his tenure. So I don't know. I mean, like you said, it is a big year, but I don't think it's a big year in terms of expecting a championship or competing for a Big Ten title. I think it's a big year in terms of, are they going to take that step backwards, or are they going to sort of maintain where they are? I think it'd be a win to go 6-2 in this crazy season, with the guys that they lost, the guys that they bring back, new quarterback. I think going 6-2 would set them up for, an even bigger year next year. And I think that's kind of the theme of Michigan football is, always looking to next year. But I think that's the case this year more so than in other seasons.
Well, you touched on the testing issue. That is the stat that's new to college football this year. We are all watching that from week to week. And, of course, the SEC, ACC, Sun Belt, a couple of other conferences have been playing for a month now. Have you been surprised at how well it's gone so far as, the test results, and really not a lot of players missing time?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like every game I've watched, there have been some COVID impact one way or another. I mean, first game I watched was the LSU game against Mississippi State, and they didn't have Derek Stingley Jr. I don't know if that was COVID related or not, but he was ill. And then they were missing other players, too, that on the defense that opted out due to COVID. And then you saw that defense get gashed. They lost to Mississippi State. And then Oklahoma versus Kansas State. Kansas State won somehow despite missing their entire secondary due to COVID.
Yeah.
I don't know how they pull that off against Oklahoma's passing attack, but props to them. And then just yesterday, I saw Florida is postponing or canceling, all football-related activities. They're having an outbreak right now. And Florida's a really good team. They're top 10 team. So that could be big for them in a bad way. I don't know. I mean, I feel like a lot of teams have had to deal with this in not so positive ways, and I'm just curious to see how Big Ten teams handle it. I mean, Jim Harbaugh has said all season that his team has handled it well. At one point, they had 1,000 tests in a row without any negatives. So we'll see if that comes to fruition during the season, if they can stay healthy and avoid those positive tests.
Well, final question for you, Orion. The reality is we will learn a lot more about this team on the road next weekend up in Minnesota. And, usually I don't look at an opener and say it's a must win. But as we said at the top of the interview, when you play 8 games, man, a win in Minneapolis against really a good Gopher team, that would really be huge, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the 4 X-Factor games of sort. I mean, Minnesota, Penn State, Wisconsin, Ohio State. I mean, how Michigan does in those 4 games will determine, whether it competes for a Big Ten title or not. I mean, that's probably obvious, but I mean, it's the truth. Minnesota and Wisconsin were the 2 highest finishing teams in the Big Ten West last season. Ohio State and Penn State were the 2 highest finishing teams in the Big Ten East. It is what it is. You got to win some of those games. It's not all of them. And I think Minnesota, it's going to be difficult. I mean, they bring back quarterback, they bring back Bateman, but they did lose a lot on defense. They lost a lot on offense, too. I think they have 7 returning starters on offense, 4 on defense. I think I saw that recently.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's 100% correct. But there are holes. I mean, they're kind of in a similar spot to Michigan where they have to replace a lot of starters, really good starters, too. We'll see, We'll see what impact no fans will have. Maybe that'll make it less difficult of a road game. Regardless, Michigan still is going on the road for the first game, and they do have to break in a new quarterback on the road. So it is a difficult game. But like you said, it's a big one. It could set the tone for a season. If they win that game, they could really get some confidence moving forward.
Here with us on our game day edition today has been Orion Sang from the Detroit Free Press as we preview the upcoming season, and we've all asked so many questions. We have no answers to really what this Michigan team is going to be, how good they're going to be, how long it's going to take to develop. We start getting some of those answers next Saturday up in Minneapolis. So, Orion, we, as always, enjoy having you on the show. And the next time we chat, it's going to be about what happened on the field. And, man, I can't wait to do that. So we look forward to that next visit.
For sure.
Thanks to Orion Sang from the Detroit Free Press for joining us today. Next week, we start our season schedule of 2 shows. On Tuesday's Michigan Game Day show, our scheduled guest is Nick Baumgartner from The Athletic. On Thursday, we will have the radio play-by-play voice of the Golden Gophers, Mike Grimm. So get ready. Who knows what will happen in the next 8 weeks, but at least we have Michigan and college football back. That will do it for another show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!